May 29th, 2019, on the Danube River over in Budapest, Hungary. The Hableany, which was a river cruise tour boat with 35 people on board, was being overtaken northbound by the newly christened Viking Sigyn, a river cruise boat that did multi-day cruises. While being overtaken on their two-whistle or their port side, the Hableany began to maneuver to the port to go towards their dock to finish their cruise for the evening. While it was doing that, the Viking Sigyn struck the Hableany midships on her port side. The vessel capsized and sank underneath the Margaret Bridge in Budapest. Of the 35 people on board, 2 Hungarian crew members and 26 South Korean tourists were killed. In the Hableany and Viking Sigyn incident, both vessels failed to take effective actions to avoid collision. Rule 8 is the action to avoid collision, which lays out all the requirements that those two vessels needed to follow. Part A. Any action taken to avoid collision shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be positive, made in ample time, and with due regard to the observance of good seamanship. Basically, this just means that make it in time. Do it early. Don't wait to the last minute to make a maneuver that you could have made and should have made earlier. Part B. Any alteration of course or speed to avoid collision shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be large enough to be readily apparent to another vessel observing visually or by radar. A succession of small alterations of course or speed should be avoided. When you make your maneuvers, make it grand, make it big. Don't make small little adjustments that, over a distance aren't noticeable. Big maneuvers are noticeable very quickly, very easily. Part C. If there is sufficient sea room, alteration of course alone may be the most effective action to avoid a close quarters situation, provided that it is made in good time, is substantial, and does not result in another close quarters situation. So basically, you can slow down, you can speed up, or in this case, just alter your course. But don't put yourself in a bind in another situation. Part D. Action taken to avoid collision with another vessel shall be such as to result in passing at a safe distance. The effectiveness of the action shall be carefully checked until the other vessel is finally passed and clear. So when we're, in open water, out in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific or wherever, open water where there's nothing around but water, and obviously the vessel that you're meeting, most of the time the captain's required CPA or closest point of approach is probably going to be within 2 to 3 miles. In some instances, they may require up to 5 miles if they're a more sensitive ship, but for the most part, 2 to 3 miles, that's a good range. On the inland side, a lot of times we measure our safe distance by mere feet, especially in the canal, in the intercoastal waterway, where there isn't that much room. You're battling the wind, or the person that's meeting you is battling the wind. You may wind up getting very close. Like I said, within feet occasionally. But in either situation, whether you're deep sea and passing within several miles, or inland and passing close enough where you can hand off a cup of coffee, you always have to make sure that your maneuver has been effective. Constantly check it until everything is clear. And then you can, mentally throttle back for a little bit and proceed on. Part E. If necessary to avoid collision or allow more time to assess the situation, a vessel shall slacken her speed or take all way off by stopping or reversing her means of propulsion. So here is just exactly as it says. If you need more time, buy yourself more time. Throttle back. Take your engines out of gear. Back her down. Do something that gives you time to assess the situation. And sometimes that may be enough to just let everything clear out in front of you. Part F. The vessel, which by any of these rules is required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel, shall, when required by the circumstances of the case, take early action to allow sufficient sea room for the safe passage of the other vessel. So part 1 of F basically says that even though we have a pecking order and we have what to do in certain situations, whether it's meeting, crossing, overtaking, if you're required by the rules to keep out of the way because of your vessel having a higher status than the other or lower status than the other, you have to adhere to that. Adhere to the pecking order versus meeting, crossing, or overtaking situations to get out of the way and to make your maneuver known. Part 2. A vessel required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel is not relieved of this obligation if approaching the other vessel so as to involve risk of collision, and shall, when taking action, have full regard to the action which may be required by the rules of this part. So, if you're coming up on the other vessel, you're required not to impede. You need to keep out of the way. You need to make sure you're doing things in compliance with the rules. You need to make sure that you are making early, effective maneuvers. Okay? Part 3. A vessel, the passage of which is not to be impeded, remains fully obliged to comply with the rules of this part when the two vessels are approaching one another so as to involve the risk of collision. So here we have the stand-on vessel. This is the one that's not to be impeded. But they still have to make sure that they're going to keep out of the way if the situation warrants it. And if they're going to keep out of the way and they have to maneuver, then they have to make sure that they are making a substantial maneuver that is visually and electronically by radar noticed. They can't just, again, make slight corrections. They've got to make a grand gesture, so to speak. Question of the week. Last week's question and answer, both inland and international. A vessel blank cross a narrow channel if such crossing impedes the passage of a vessel that can only operate within that channel. The answer is, shall not. Our winners this week, Ian Whalen, Ryan M., and the crew of the motor vessel Captain Jack Higman. This week's question, both international and inland. Which vessel must have a gong or other equipment which will make the sound of a gong? Please include your answers in the comments below. Next week, we will take a look at Rule 9, narrow channels. This is probably one of my more favorite rules, mainly because for me, this is where I operate. I operate narrow channels. The Gulf Intracoastal Waterway, ship channels, these are all narrow channels. So this is, to me, this is my bread and butter. So folks, please remember to click like, subscribe. Please stay safe out there. There have been too many incidents in the last month or so that have been results of poor decisions that have been made by people out on the water that have cost lives. Please take a moment, step back, take a look at your surroundings. If you're operating in a skiff or if you're operating on a tow or a ship, look at what's around you, make decisions based on your environment. Okay? Nothing is worth shaving 20 seconds off your day, off a trip. Nothing is worth that. Take your time. All right? Please. We all want to go home to our friends and our families and our loved ones. Please, by all means, take your time. All right? Have a great week, everyone. And we'll see you soon.